Hey y'all, in this second tutorial I'm going to show you how to create your own texture from scratch and also how to create a workable texture that you can apply to any one of your software programs from a photograph. Textures are great because they break up flat colors that would otherwise look super vector, super digital, and they help add an extra dimension to your work. Neutral textures like the ones I showed you in the photographs that don't have a lot of highlights and shadows and aren't very varied in value are great for background elements in your design and can also push the quality of other elements within your design. So I'll show you how to create these two textures in this video, and then I'll also show you how to apply them in different ways to find success. To create my texture from scratch, what I'm going to need is two things. A clear artboard in Photoshop with, this is 5 inches by 5 inches, 300 dpi at a high resolution. And what I've done is I've started this document in grayscale color mode. So if I go to image mode, you'll see that it's already in grayscale. I'm not working in color here because I'm eventually going to turn this into a bitmap TIFF. So it's only going to be black and white pixels anyways. The second thing that I need is a gradient. And your gradient tool is tucked behind your paint bucket tool right here. When you select it, it brings up in your control center your gradient options. And I want a gradient that's a medium gray, not dark gray and not black, to a slightly less lighter version of that gray. I'd say 2 to 5% difference in total. You don't want to make it too dark and you don't want to make it too light. So if you're using black and white or variation thereof, you want to make sure that you go back through and edit it. So I have here this color of gray, which I can change if I want to, which will change the quality of the texture that I'm making. And then I have this light gray here. So this is good enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and draw my gradient on the page. Just for purposes of this demonstration, it doesn't really matter how you draw your gradient on the page. The next thing I'm going to do to create this texture from scratch is go to image mode and create my bitmapped image. So I'm selecting 300 pixels per inch, and I don't want to use 50% threshold this time because it just doesn't give me a good range of values here, and I'll demonstrate why. So if I hit OK, you can see that 50% value is just turning all the pixels gray to light gray to a white pixel, and there are no black pixels here. So I want to make sure that I choose a bitmap mode that will allow me to customize, and the one I'm going to choose here is a halftone screen. So what I want to do is make a halftone pattern out of these dark to light values. So I'm going to hit OK, and then for the halftone screen you have a second window that pops up, and the second window allows you to set the frequency in which the shapes appear. So it's kind of like resolution where you have pixels per inch or dots per inch. It's 100 lines per inch, and that's a lot. You'll see that 100 lines per inch in the round shape at 0 degrees or 45 degrees, which is probably what your program defaults at, will give you this. And it's not, you can't really see it unless you zoom in, and you zoom in a whole lot, and it just doesn't look like anything. So I want to create something that's bolder than that. So I'm hitting undo, and I want to go back to image mode, bitmap, and I'm going to do 300 dpi halftone screen, but I'm going to change my options here. I'm going to say 25 lines per inch at a 0 degree angle in round, and hit OK. And you can see that I have my halftone pattern here. Now the change is slight. So you can see here that the dots are spaced out and small, and here that the dots are slightly larger and more dense, more close together. So it's not a huge difference. You can see that if I probably went with a value of darker gray here, just drop that down a little bit, and draw my gradient again. Image mode, bitmap, 300 halftone screen, 25 0 round. You can see that the change is a little bit more obvious. Either way, I'd like to see what works for you. So this is how you create that halftone pattern from scratch. Now, there's all kinds of different ways that you can use this texture. So you can use the image mode bitmap, or you can use one of your filters. Let me show you how that works. So I want to make, I've stepped back and got my original gradient back here, and I want to make a texture out of the filters panel. So again, I'm in grayscale mode on a 5" by 5" artboard. So I'm going to go here to my filter menu and hit filter gallery. And the filter, the filter gallery has all kinds of options that you can select from, your artistic stuff, which if you select it, you'll get varying degrees of weird things, right? Or you can select, whatever option you see fit. I like to use the sketch option because that, gives you the most black and white options available. So I'm going to say here I want to use my graphic pen, and I can here adjust the values if I want to, what the line length is. Here you get something nice and grainy. Here you get, these like longer lines. What the light to dark balance is. So obviously as you slide it up, you can see that the lines at the bottom get denser. And the stroke direction, which can be diagonal or vertical or, horizontal. I'm just going to choose horizontal for purposes of this. And then I'm going to click OK. So I now have this black and white version of my texture, of this new texture that I can save out as a bitmap TIFF and use in my other programs. So I'm going to go to image mode, and I'm going to turn this into a bitmap, and I'm going to go back to selecting 50% threshold, which will read the black and white verbatim pretty much. Make sure you're in 300 dpi, hit OK. Last step is to file save as, and then choose a name for it. So I'm going to say graphic pen and save it as a TIFF. Okay? So I'm saving this out. Bam, done. I've saved out my halftone pattern from before because I'm going to show you how to apply these in Illustrator in just a moment. But before I do that, let me also show you how to do these same steps in creating a texture from a photograph. So I have a brand new artboard here. Again, 5" by 5", 300 dpi in grayscale mode, meaning that it already is in grayscale mode. And what I'm going to do is place an embedded image of a photograph into my window here. So File, Place Embedded. I have a texture here that I photographed with my phone. I wrinkled it up and scanned it in. But you can also have textures that are pretty even tone that you photograph with your phone. And I'm just going to place this inside of my artboard. And I'm going to expand it so that it's, pretty much the entire width of the board. So this is just a piece of white printer paper that I wrinkled up and then unwrinkled and then wrinkled up again and then unwrinkled and then wrinkled up again. And you can see that it has a lot of nice kind of flat values. They're not totally different in range, but it needs some love. It needs some editing in order to make sure that it's a nice texture for me to use in a different program. So I'm going to go into my destructive adjustments mode, and first I'm going to adjust the levels. So here I want to make sure that I don't have these super dark darks and super light lights, super high highlights. But I do want to have this kind of nice mid-range of darks and highlights because that's what I want my texture to sample from. So I'm not going to totally blow out the top of my image. I'm maybe going to take the tone down a little bit. And I'm going to adjust from there. So I want to avoid having any area like this or like this in my design because that is setting the range for my bitmap TIFF. So I'm just, kind of sliding around to get to where I feel like, is a nice area. And again, toning things down, like you could tone it all the way down and just have these bits that you want to texturize. You can have like a mid-range of values that you get throughout. This is pretty good. I think I'm happy with this. Lighten it up just a little bit more. Okay. The next thing I want to adjust here is the brightness and contrast. This is just kind of like a last stop for me. So I get to decide, okay, is this the lightest I want to go? Is this the amount of contrast I want, or do I want to make it a little bit dull? I think this is okay because I want it lighter. I want it to pick up more of these kind of solid shadows here that I've built, but not with too much intensity. So I've adjusted my photo in grayscale mode so it has a nice medium range values. Now I'm going to go back into image mode in bitmap. And again, it's going to ask me if I want to flatten layers. Yes. Now I have several modes that I can pick from here. I can do 50% threshold. I can do diffusion dither. I can do halftone screen, which will give me those dots again. I'm going to try and show you diffusion dither this time. So 300 pixels per inch, diffusion dither, hit OK. And you can see that it just creates this like nice value of dots throughout. So kind of like, you know, when you zoom out, you see just, you know, these little dots. When you zoom in, you see, you know, when you zoom in, you see these little dots. When you zoom out, you see a more realistic view of the paper itself. But that little noise there is just nice to have. So I'm going to save this out. File, save as. I'm going to call this paper TIFF as a TIFF and save. All right, so I've showed you how to create 2 textures from scratch and 1 texture from a photograph. Let's get to applying them. I'm in Adobe Illustrator now on a 5" by 5" document in CMYK color space at high resolution. So I need to file place the textures that I've just built in, and I'm going to file place those bitmap TIFFs and not the originals. So from here I go to File, Place, obviously, and I select one texture that I did. Let's start with the halftone. So select, place, and you can see that I have the option to draw it out, which is what I'm going to do, or click it out. It's totally up to you. The thing about bitmap TIFFs is that they work as a color changeable item, so you don't have to image trace them at all. They just can be changed in color value by selecting the right color swatch. Now you'll notice that what happened here is it just changed one value, you know, to gray, and that's because it's not recognizing this object in the right color space. So with this object selected, I'm going to go to color, and you'll see that it's only reading K for black, black and white. And so from the flyout menu, I'm going to make sure to hit CMYK, and you'll see that it changes now to the color that I want it to. Now this halftone pattern is really nice, but on its own, it's too contrasty to be a background element. So this is where you kind of can come into play by using a clipping mask. So moving the object behind a shape and hitting a clipping mask option, which is Command 7. And you see that I have this shape now within the shape that I've built for it. And what's really cool about halftone patterns is that if you put them on a similar color, so let's say just a lighter shade of this here, you can get a really cool effect without having to, you know, kind of break the mold of, you know, downloading a raster pattern and trying to make it work with blending modes. So here I've created, I'm, you know, just creating this kind of off-register halftone effect like newsprint comics. And you can do that with similar colors, or you can do that with a color that is a complement to that original color. So let me see, make sure I can select this one here and show you. So let's see, let's try a nice like orange here. So you can see the difference, how this creates this kind of blending mode, this extra color out of the two. Another way that you can use patterns is to simulate space or a wash in the background. So I'm going to file place another pattern in here, and I'm going to use my paper pattern here. So when I was working with this, I noticed it looked a lot like water. So I want to create this really cool water, sense of water here as my entire background element for my design. So since these bitmap TIFFs are interchangeable with color, first let me double check that I'm working in the CMYK color space. I totally am. And now I'm going to choose my color. So I'm going to do like a dark blue here for this. Whoops, it seems like it didn't want to change the color. So let me go ahead and change it again. And the next thing I want to do is create my background color. So I'm just going to draw another shape behind, place it behind my element, and I'm going to use the lighter color for this. So you can see how this change in color, this one texture that we took from an unrelated photograph, like it looks like water, so we're kind of pushing the water direction there. With just a slight change of color here, actually starts to look a little bit like water, which is really interesting. So, just experiment. Maybe that value is too light. Maybe I need something that's more neutral here. And so, or maybe I need to change the value of my texture color to something that's lighter, in order for it to start looking like water. So, and you can also scale the texture up if you like. So if I wanted to make it super huge, what kind of effect does it have here now? Sorry, I meant to hit Command 0 to center. What kind of effect does it have here now on your background? It looks more kind of like clouds or a mountain range. So again, another creative way to use that flat texture that you just made. For the last one, you can apply texture as a whitewash to other elements in your design. So obviously it would be a layer that sits on top in a white color so that it looks like it's chipping out of this element here. So I just have the word typography that I typed out in a pretty bold typeface. I'm going to file place my last texture, my graphic pen texture. And I'm just going to draw this one out to be the width. Okay? And what I want to do is create a clipping mask for this texture that is just the size of the typography box, the parameter. So I'm going to choose like this nice middle ground here because I don't want to chip away at my letters too much. And I'm just going to build a rectangle around just this element here. And since it's on top, I can already make my clipping mask. Awesome. So I'm going to select my graphic pen texture here and change the value from black to white. And it doesn't really matter if I'm working in grayscale mode here. Oops. Because it should automatically just change the color. Perfect. So now that I've laid it on top of this element in the background, you can see that it just adds this extra layer of depth to the typography. And if I move it around, I can have slight variations of how the texture looks. Now, it's not ideal. It's not the most ideal situation. But if you have a set of elements that you're designing on a white background and you want to give them a little texture like this, having an overlay of white in a grain can be really cool, a really cool and easy way to add some of this destructive texture to that element. So there you have it. How to make 3 textures, 2 from scratch and 1 from a photograph, and how to translate it into Illustrator.